I told you I hate this food. You're harassing me by making the S don't like, aren't you?
Your husband likes it though.
Just cook something else right now.
I've had enough of how my mother-in-law yelled and screamed when she didn't like something. I'm not sure if I can take her sarcasm the rest of my life. I was half resigned to the fact that I had to endure my mother-in-law's bad behavior. But then something happened that changed my life. My name is Ellen. My husband George have been married for 3 years now. We were living with my parents and owned their house. My husband, who is often not home from work, is currently on a business trip. I used to feel uneasy not having him, but now I am so busy that I don't miss him too much. My daily schedule is like this. First, I get up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast for my father-in-law, who wakes up very early. While he's eating, I clean the house laundry. After finishing all the household chores, I finally pushed myself to get ready and go to my part-time job. As soon as I come home from work, I make the meal. After that, I clean the house, do it again, and the day is done. Such a restless day is tiring enough, but there's one thing that makes it even more tiring. That was my mother-in-law's bullshit. Although my mother-in-law doesn't stay at home all the time, she does any housework. My husband once told me that he couldn't remember what his mother's homemade cooking tasted like. I guess her husband wasn't too bright. He was quite small. Even though she did nothing, my moth had an attitude. She's very picky about the food. She insists that the places I take her are clean. I felt terrible that she would go to lengths to make me feel bad about my mother-in-law seems to have made a hobby of bullying me because she was such a person. She was well known in the neighborhood as she would wear jewelry that didn't suit her fat fingers and stroll around the neighborhood. When they saw her, the neighbors thought she looked nice, even though they didn't know her. The neighbors didn't want to upset my mother-in-law, and the reason for that was my father's job. My father-in-law was an executive at a well-known local company. He's retired now, but he's well-known figure, and he's still involved with... There are a lot of people who work at the same company as my father-in-law, so it's a big part of the community. That's why the neighbors were so concerned about my mother-in-law. My father-in-law was never bossy, but my mother-in-law was always bossy to him. The neighbors didn't like it, but they talked back. I felt like I had no one on my side, saw how they handled things. No matter what my mother-in-law did, she had no one to talk to in the neighborhood. After retiring, my father-in-law, who had always been very hardworking, became even busier. Then, unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer. It was very advanced, so he was told needed to prepare himself. I am grateful for my father-in-law, the opposite of my mother-in-law. I understand that it's also because we have been able to live without worrying about finances. To show my appreciation, I tried to do as much as I could for my father-in-law. I talked to him to keep him occupied and sometimes play cards with him. The most important thing I did was to make easy-to-eat meals for him so he could get as much nutrition as possible. My father-in-law was happy that I could help him, and he said many kind words of thanks to me.
Thanks to you. I'm happy every day.
No. I just doing what I...
I apologize for the burden my wife has put on you. She just doesn't do things around the house.
I guess my father-in-law's gentle nature makes it difficult for him to say anything about my mother-in-law's behavior. Still, it was enough for me that his mother-in-law treated me badly.
I'm sorry for leaving everything to Ellen when my wife is the one who's doing a better job. You don't have to force yourself to like me, you know.
No, please, don't say such a thing. I just want to repay you for everything you've done for me.
Thank you. Then one day, things took a turn for the worse. My father-in-law's condition worsened, and he had to be hospitalized in an emergency room. When he was taken to the hospital by ambulance, he was in a coma. The doctors told us that they didn't have much time left with him and that our family should prepare. It was so sudden that my mind went into a state of panic. I couldn't stop crying when I saw my father-in-law in front of me, his face covered with pain. I thought my mother-in-law must have been very distressed under such circumstances. I asked her how she was doing. However, she had a look on her face did not expect. I'm sure he'll never recover from this. His inheritance is going to be enormous. Her insane word made me very angry. Meanwhile, my father-in-law didn't regain consciousness, but his breathing had improved. I visited him every day and talked a lot, even though he couldn't hear me. I hoped that if I talked to him, would wake up one day and answer me. But he didn't seem to wake up. As for my mother-in-law, she never visits him.
Why didn't you go check on your husband in a while?
Don't you tell me what to do. I'm to every day. I can't spend my time in a hospital, waste of time.
Whenever I tried to encourage her to visit him, she just kept saying horrible things to me. She even had the audacity to say something like this.
Hey, Ellen, you bring in clean clothes every day, don't you? You should pretend I did it, okay? Don't make the mistake of saying you.
My mother-in-law was trying to make me look good.
He'll never wake up, and his inheritance is mine. Don't talk nonsense to people.
The only thing on my mother-in-law's mind is her father-in-law's inheritance. I was so angry at her selfishness that I decided to take action. Since my father-in-law was no longer there, my mother-in-law's bullying was worse than ever.
Stop talking about visiting him and cooking.
It's too early for preparing dinner going to the hospital now. I'll be home soon then. I'll cook.
You really piss me off, Ellen. You know I've told you 100 times that you can do nothing but leave me alone. He doesn't need any visa or SIM card.
My mother-in-law kept saying horrible to my father-in-law. I wanted to say something back, but to hold it back. After a while, I received a call from the hospital with the great news I was waiting for.
Is it true? Thank God.
My father-in-law finally woke up from a coma, and, to my surprise, his condition had stabilized. I immediately went with my mother to the hospital room.
Welcome back. Good to see you.
Me too. I'm sorry for all the trouble caused you.
My father-in-law smiled peacefully. My mother-in-law acted like she was seeing my father-in-law for the first time.
Honey, I took care of you every day.
I see. Your clothes are clean. Do you need me to iron them for you?
Yes, I did everything.
My mother-in-law stared at me. I guess she wanted me to play along. I ignored her signs and let her out sight. I could tell by the way she looked that she was annoyed with me for not listening to her. And my father-in-law didn't miss it.
Well, I'm going to go now. I have some errands to do, so please care of the rest, okay, Ellen?
My mother-in-law was in a bad mood, ignoring her signs. She looked at my father-in-law's face in the hospital room.
Ellen, are you okay?
What? What do you mean?
My wife's attitude was strange. I thought it was you who took care of the time.
My father-in-law saw through it all.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by edit, but I can certainly help with any spelling or grammar mistakes.
Don't worry. I'm fine now. Just tell the truth. Did she do anything to you while
The truth is, I've been wanting to tell someone about what my mother had done. I kept it for the right reasons, but thought I'd have to share it with anyone who asked.
Well, I'm sorry if this makes you hear. Please listen to this.
I felt so bad that I took out my recorder and played the recording one voice. I was sure my father-in-law couldn't hear everything my mother-in-law said.
When my husband dies, I want my inheritance all to myself. I want my husband to die soon. I don't want to take care of him anymore. It's a waste of time.
Such statements were all over the PE. I looked at my father-in-law, who was laughing instead.
She's turned into a greedy bastard, hey? I can't give any of my inheritance, woman.
He was laughing, but I could sense was very angry inside. A few days later, my father-in-law became stable and was able to leave the hospital. After returning home, my mother went out of her way to tell my father how difficult it was to take care of him even. My father-in-law didn't object, he just listened. Shortly after he came home, my husband came home from his business trip to see our father.
Dad, I'm sorry I'm late.
I'm fine, as you can see.
Yeah, it's all good. They changed the location for me. That's within commuting distance from here.
I'm really glad that you and Ellen are looking out for me.
My father-in-law seemed really happy that my husband and I were there. From then on, my husband and I took care of my father-in-law. He recovered temporarily, but did not fully recover. I can tell he's getting weaker every day. This time, I realized that the real approaching. My husband and I promised ourselves best until we had to say goodbye. However, my mother-in-law was still as before, not taking care of my father-in-law at all. She would just go out and not. I guess she thought that now that Mai has come home, she can take it easy hands. Also, since my father-in-law and I came back at the same time, it seemed harder for her to bully me. My father-in-law was eating less, and it was obvious that he had no appetite. He said his last words to us, as if trying to squeeze them out.
Thank you both so much. I've left you a will, and I'd like to have you read it after I'm gone. It was very nice of you to take care until the end.
With those words, his life came to. There were many people at my father's funeral. I was deeply moved to think that my father-in-law was so trusted and loved by so many people. On the other hand, my mother-in-law lives in such a situation. It was thanks to my father-in-law's personality that so many people were gathered. My mother-in-law acted as if she were the one who brought all these people together. She even went around telling everyone that she was the one who took care of him in the very end. She didn't cry a single tear, and it was unsettling to see her at such a, "You didn't care about your husband." I suppressed my desire to expose my mother-in-law's behavior to the attendees. I didn't want to make a scene at my father-in-law's gravesite. The funeral went very well, and I was relieved that my father-in-law could finally rest in peace. When we got home, my mother-in-law changed dramatically.
Oh, I'm so tired. Funerals are depressing. Well, now I have my inheritance and can look forward to the rest of my life.
My mother-in-law seemed convinced that she had my father-in-law's inheritance. She was in a good mood, muttering something about what she wanted. That's when my husband showed her the door.
Sorry to put you in a bad mood, but Dad left the will before he passed away. I haven't read it yet, but I think something about inheritance.
I don't need to look at the will. It's mine.
Okay, but let's just calm down and...
When my husband carefully opened the envelope, his mother-in-law took the paper and began to read it.
What? What the hell is this?
When my mother-in-law saw the will, she turned pale, stood there with her mouth open. I took "They will" back from my stunned mother-in-law and read through it. It stated that I would inherit everything my father-in-law had. It also said that I was the heir, but wanted the inheritance to be used for George and me as a couple.
Ellen took care of Dad while I was... This totally makes sense. That's how grateful he was to Ellen.
But all of it. This is so wrong.
She interrupted our conversation and screaming.
It's not right that you, a stranger, get the whole thing. She must have forged the will. You flirted with him, you dirty little liar.
Hey, Mom, stop.
Finally, My husband started to get angry.
You've never taken care of Dad? I've heard stories from both Ellen. That's why he's so grateful to Elder for helping him when he needed it.
My mother-in-law became hysterical and started crying. Please, please at least leave me this. I did feel sorry for her, having lived in that house for so long. To calm my sobbing mother-in-law, I gave her a small portion of my inheritance.
Then you will have this house. I know you don't have any money, so use some. But please don't live like you did, I said, looking at my mother-in-law's face. We are leaving this house, so please your own.
Right after she knew she would get the job and some money, her mood changed all of a sudden.
Oh, thank God! I was afraid I'd lose the house too. If you're going to leave, now get out.
And then she went right back to being a bitch. I was so frustrated that I fell for my mother-in-law's fake cry. But if I leave this house, I'll have to live with my mother-in-law again. The joy of being away from my mother outweighed the frustration of giving up a small portion of my inheritance. A week later, we decided to move out of our house and start looking for a new place. For now, we are thinking of moving apartment and building a house soon. Thanks to the inheritance left to us by our father-in-law, we will be able to buy a nice house. I'm also planning to build an altar in honor of my father-in-law as a token of my appreciation. I was so excited to think that finally I would be able to live without my mother-in-law's constant scrutiny. On the other hand, my mother-in-law has not been able to make any significant changes in her lifestyle, and she continues to spend as wildly as ever. In addition, now that we have left, spread, and the neighbors changed. Now that my father-in-law has passed, the neighbors no longer need to be concerned about my mother-in-law. People who had been complaining about their mothers-in-law started spreading rumors that she became more and more isolated. My mother-in-law, who had always been extravagant, spent more than her monthly pension. Finally, she sold the house, which to have. She has nothing to do with me now, really care where she goes or what.